Good afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon.
Thank you for joining us. So, as you're hopefully aware, because you've logged on to the webinar, we're going to do a demonstration of the Nexa3D NXE400, which is the next generation of ultra-fast resin-based 3D printers. So, first of all, we'll give you a quick presentation, which we should just be sharing with you now. And then during that presentation, we're actually going to do a live demo of the printer, where we'll be printing 127 prints in the space of 11.5 minutes. So luckily, because it's so fast, we can actually do this during the webinar, and you can see it start and you can also see it finish. So hopefully on your screen now, you have the presentation. So as we said, we're going to give you some background on who we are as a business, who created our, give you some background on Nexa, talk you through what this technology is and how it works, and also do this live demonstration. So my name's Simon Chandler, I'm Managing Director of Created. I also have my colleague with me.
Hi, I'm Sachin Patel, I'm Major Accounts Manager and Applications Engineer.
So briefly, as I said, we'll talk about Created and Nexa, give you the demo, and we'll also give you some background on the materials. And also then Sachin's going to take you through some of the applications and the use cases of how businesses and organizations are actually using this technology today, and the benefits they're getting. At the end, there will be a Q&A. So feel free to put your questions in as we go along, or equally put them in at the end, and we'll have time for a few questions depending on what comes up. So Created are a UK-based additive manufacturing solutions provider. What that means is we work with all aspects of additive manufacturing. The bulk of what we do is we work with organizations to understand how additive manufacturing can add value to your business and can unlock cost savings, efficiency gains, and time savings. What we do is we work with you to then integrate the equipment into your business in most cases, and we also provide all of the wraparound services, so installation, calibration, training services. We also provide all of the ongoing services like technical support, on-site engineer maintenance, repair services, and of course things like the consumables, spare parts, anything you need. As well as that, we also provide things like managed services, and we provide print bureau as well, where you don't have enough of a demand for a particular type of 3D printer to have it in-house on site. The technologies that we cover within additive manufacturing, everything from desktop FDM through to large format, also desktop SLA through to industrial ultra-fast, which is what you're going to see today. We also offer carbon fiber composites for high strength applications, and we offer metal 3D printing as well, and 3D printers. Around that, we also offer complementary systems and services. So for example, things like generative design software. In terms of who we work with, as I mentioned, it's all UK-based businesses. This slide is our vanity slide. So obviously there's some big names on there, some nice names, but equally we work with everything from one-man band through to SME, kind of mid-sized corporates, all the way up to multinationals. All of our customers have specific needs. And really, additive manufacturing makes such a big difference to these businesses, whatever size they are and whatever industry they're in, that we're able to help them with that and unlock some big gains for them. Most of our customers operate across engineering and manufacturing. We also have a lot of customers who are in the design and creative industry space, and also then things like higher education, universities, and defence and military as well. So, to the exciting bit. We will now be running a live demonstration of the printer. So we have the printer set up. and ready to go for you. We're going to shortly transfer over to a different camera. There we go, that should be on your screen now. And my colleague Matthew has actually just initiated the printer. So it's going to be a little bit difficult for you to actually see a huge amount, but you should start to see the build plate rising up and down. The first 3 layers take the longest. And then after that, it should be processing at around about 4 seconds per layer. What we're printing today is 126 clips in a single build. The total build time is 11.5 minutes, and that's 157 layers. So we're printing this in what's called the XGPP blue resin, which is a prototyping resin, so it is one of the faster resins. If you wanted something that was in a more functional resin for end-use parts, then it would take a little bit longer. You're probably looking at something like 20 to 22 minutes to complete the same build in a functional resin. There we go. So we will leave that screen available for you to see, and we'll just jump back to the presentation. But you should still have that live feed on your screen as well, so you can keep an eye on that. So just while that's going on, we'll carry on with the presentation. On your screen now, you can see a screenshot from the Nexa3D software. This is the software that comes with the printer, and it is basically used to facilitate the entire printing process. So everything from importing your design, orientating it, adding on multiple prints into the build, creating the support material needed, all the way through to then choosing your resin, choosing your quality settings, and sending that to the printer. You can add multiple of the NXE400 printers onto the software, and you can monitor each of those printers through the software. As you can see on that screenshot, each printer has a camera, so you can see a live view of what's actually happening. And you can also queue builds for each of the different printers. So you can actually use this as a workflow to optimize your printing volumes. To give you a little bit of background on the manufacture of this technology, as you can see, they are called Nexa3D. Nexa3D were established in 2016. Now, they grew out of an incubator and a VC fund called Exponential Works, which is based in California. Exponential Works was started by a chap called Avi Rickenthal, who some of you will probably recognize the name. He was the CEO of 3D Systems for a number of years. 3D Systems is obviously one of the biggest 3D printer manufacturers in the world. So he has a good pedigree, and he's assembled a high-class team around him who have developed this technology and have then grown out of that incubator into Nexa3D. The entire focus of Nexa3D is on taking 3D printing from being a technology that's just used mainly for prototyping or one-offs, through to something that is fast enough to actually generate small batches of end-use components. So taking it from just prototyping into the production sphere. And that's why we talk about this being the next generation of 3D printing. So the technology itself, it is called LSPC, and this stands for Lubricant Sublayer Photo Curing. The printer can print at anything up to 10 millimeters per minute across the entire build size. So with this particular technology, whether you print one object or you fill the build size with multiple objects, the print time is the same per layer, whatever you're doing. If you're printing in a prototyping resin, it's obviously at the fastest. If you're printing in a more functional resin, then it's a little bit slower than this. How the technology works. So at the bottom of the printer is an LED array. Those LEDs shine up through what they call the light guide, and the light guide is there to disperse the LEDs in a uniform manner. This means that the LED light passes in a uniform manner through the LCD screen, which sits above that. And all the LCD screen is there to do is provide a mask. So in the printer software, each layer tells the LCD screen whether to display as black or white. And where it displays as white, that allows the LED light to pass through, which then hits the membrane, which sits above the LCD screen. The membrane is the really clever piece of technology in this. Above the membrane sits the resin. This is a liquid resin which is UV curable, and above the resin sits the build plate. The build plate itself obviously leaves a very thin layer of liquid resin on the membrane, and as the light passes through, it cures that resin. The build plate then rises up layer after layer after layer, growing the part underneath it. And as I said, the clever piece of this technology is the membrane. Because the membrane is self-lubricating, after it's cured a layer, the build plate can rise up and that sucks new resin, fresh resin, into that space underneath, which can then be cured, and the process repeats. So it is continually rising and sucking resin up as it goes. Now, obviously, one benefit of this technology is that it's fast, but also the other benefit is that because it is such a continuous process, you avoid the layering and the stepping that you often see with other types of 3D printing, so that you're actually able to generate prints that look as though they've been injection molded. Some stats on the printer itself. You have a build size of 280 millimeters by 165 across the XY. And then you have 400 millimeters in height. As you can see, price-wise, you're looking at about £50,000 for the printer itself. And then we have a variety of options for the support plan, various consumable starter kits, wash and cure units if required, and also other options. So the materials, because of the way that the process works, there's actually quite a wide range of materials which can be printed on this printer. Generally, they fall into three different families, which is prototyping, functional, and biocompatible. At the moment, there are 8 resins available across those three families. But the interesting thing is that there are new resins being released on quite a consistent basis. And the reason for this is that Nexa3D are able to partner with existing chemical companies. So you can see in this instance the main partner at the moment is Henkel. And because of the way the technology works, they're able to work with Henkel to verify resins that already exist and verify that they actually print consistently on this platform. So that means that you're getting an increasing amount of resins with different kind of functionalities and different properties that are becoming available almost on a monthly basis. In terms of the prototyping resins, as you can see, you have GPP, clear, blue, and grey. So these are out-and-out prototyping resins, very fast, but maybe don't have the functional properties in terms of strength, or flexibility, or temperature resistance, for example. There's also 2 others which actually bridge between prototyping and functional. And these are XE Black, which is a cyanide ester material, and ABS HT Orange, which is an ABS-like material. So, as I mentioned, the second family is the functional resins. And as you can see, the XE Black, as I just mentioned, it bridges those 2 gaps. And this is really because not only does it print at high speed, but both the XE Black and its sister material, XE White, have functional properties. So these cyanide ester resins are actually used already in things like the automotive industry for end-use components on vehicles. The other material that's available is the 3843 ABS, which is an ABS-like material. And then the third one of the family is the biocompatible and this is a certified biocompatible material called XMED 412, which Sachin will touch upon a bit later. In terms of post-processing, as with all of these resin-based 3D printing technologies, it's a three-stage process. So the first stage is what you're seeing here on your screen, which is the printing. At the end of this process, the prints will be complete, but they will obviously have uncured resin on them, which needs washing off. So stage 2 is the wash. The wash cycle can be performed with 3 different rinsing agents. So the first one, which is the most popular, which a lot of you will know about, is IPA, isopropyl alcohol. That's the most common. There's also TPM, which is available and has been used a bit more recently because of the difficulty in getting a hold of IPA because of the COVID-19 situation. IPA has been in high demand. And also because of that, Nexa have developed their own cleaning agent, which is called X-Clean. And X-Clean is actually available to purchase now. It works with all the different types of resin-based 3D printing. And X-Clean is actually 3 times more absorbent in terms of uncured resin than something like IPA. It also doesn't have the health and safety difficulties that IPA has. So it's a much safer and much easier material to handle. The other advantage is that if you wanted to, there is a distillation process you can do to take out the uncured resin and actually recycle your X-Clean cleaning agent, enabling you to then reuse that. So we should now be at the stage where we are skipping back to the print, which we'll put live for you, and we should be just about coming up to finish. There we go. So you should have that back on your screen now. And as I said at the beginning, we're printing this in XGPP blue resin, and it is 126 clips, all arranged on a single build, and total print time 11.5 minutes. So we should be just coming up to the final layer. There we go. So that is print complete. So as just mentioned, the process now would be that we take this build plate off the printer, put that into the wash, obviously put a fresh build plate in and press go on the next batch of printing. So we will skip back and just finish off our presentation for you. So next stage in the presentation is I'll pass over to Sachin, who will take you through some of the real-world applications and how this technology is being used by customers today.
Great, thanks, Simon. So before we get into any specific applications, I wanted to first cover how additive manufacturing is being applied in industry today. So 3D printing has been around for 30, 40 years, and certainly since I started about 8 years ago, additive manufacturing was really only suitable for prototyping, R&D, and generally for supporting the design cycle. What we've seen is this development over time, certainly over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, from the days of early additive manufacturing being used for design cycle and prototyping through to where we are now with the development of materials, technologies, reliability and speed, and seeing more of a movement into production with functional parts like jigs and fixtures, and end-use parts as well, in terms of low batch production, spare parts, legacy components, those sorts of things that we'll be touching on a bit later. The beauty of what Nexa is doing is it's not only covering the prototyping side of things with super fast speeds now, but also enabling both production and end-use components. what we're going to be focusing on over the next couple of slides are these three key areas. So true rapid prototyping, small batch production, and urgent production. And these are things that are really applicable across quite a wide range of industry, from automotive and aerospace through to robotics and automation, as well as more specialist industries like medical and wearables. So in terms of true rapid prototyping, the ability with Nexa3D, with the ability to meet customer demand, or truly meet customer demand, have a much faster turnaround on printed parts, a much shorter time to market, and same day, and in most cases immediate feedback on components. In terms of small batch production, anything from one-offs to 1,000 or even 2,000 off, without the limitations or costs of mold tooling. But the other thing there is high mix components and mass customization. So there's no reason why you couldn't produce 1,000 off, but each one has a slight different variant to it. That's what we mean by high mix parts and true mass customization. And then finally, moving into urgent production, things like spares and legacy components on existing machinery, any of these temporary fixes and parts that you can use to minimize downtime. And then things like rapid responses to things that are going on around us. So market and environmental changes without the need for tooling, or even a stop in your production. And that leads me quite nicely on to our first specific application that we wanted to focus on, which are these nasal swabs here. So this is the material here is the XMed412, which Simon was talking about earlier. So it's a really great example of toolless batch production. So obviously we all know the problem that we were faced with over the last few months with the urgent requirement for medical devices and PPE in response to the coronavirus pandemic. What Nexa3D were able to do was work with Henkel to quickly develop this resin and essentially allow them to quickly meet the urgency and demands of production without the costs and limitations of tooling, massively reducing speed to market. Nexa were able to produce around 5,400 of these swabs per printer per day, which comes out to around 16 seconds per swab. Now, obviously, we understand that at that quantity, at 5,000, at that sort of quantity, injection molding is clearly more suitable. But really, what this allowed Nexa3D to do was to cover that stopgap. In that first sort of day one, they were able to produce these parts, and whilst manufacturers out there, whilst injection molding companies were producing the tooling to be able to then go to true mass production with injection molding. Moving on to another example of batch production. So we're actually working with an injection molding company at the moment, who we've worked with for a while, but they've approached us recently with a problem they face where they have to turn away business if a client asks them for sort of anything around 500 off. Just the cost of tooling are just too expensive for the client, and then obviously your per part costs as well are quite pricey. So they approached us with this problem, and with the idea that 3D printing might be able to solve that. And really the Nexa3D fits perfectly in that space. So what we were able to do was talk about the Nexa3D being able to complement their current manufacturing capabilities, offering their customers the option for smaller batches in a repeatable fashion as well. So now they have the ability, if it's anything around sort of the injection molding quantities, they've got that as an option. But for those smaller jobs, they can offer their clients 3D printing as an option, actually print the end use parts close to injection molding quality, and actually allows them to win the business that they wouldn't have been able to win previously. Moving on to true rapid prototyping, additive manufacturing has always been a very fast turnaround technology, giving engineers, designers the ability to turn around parts within days rather than weeks and months of outsourcing. With Nexa3D, we're speeding up that CAD to part process, offering what we like to call true rapid prototyping. And that turnaround goes from weeks and months goes from days to minutes and hours. A really good example of this is a design consultancy that we were working with whose client needed a quick sign off on a new product. So they set up a 2-hour meeting in which the client was invited over. They had a printed component that they reviewed in the 2-hour meeting, and changes were made to that part depending on the client's feedback. The part was then iterated, and those changes were applied to the CAD model. And with the Nexa technology, they were able to reprint that part within the 2-hour meeting. And by the end of it, they were able to present it to the client, have sign off immediately, all within the space of those 2 hours. So a much shorter design cycle and a much more efficient use of time. Any industry from design and engineering, consultancies, motorsports, energy, all these sorts of industries where shortening the design cycle and having immediate data and feedback and speeding up the time to market is truly invaluable. And lastly, just a few things on urgent tooling, repairs, and focusing more on sort of machine spares and legacy components. These are parts that generally have potentially long lead times, high costs. What we're doing with the Nexa3D technology is taking the supply chain issue out of the equation. With this technology, you have the ability to print parts immediately as they're required, completely minimizing your downtime. A great example of this is a robotics company that we've been working with for a while now. They're at the stage now, they've been using additive for quite a while, but they're at a stage now where they're developing robotics and machinery today with additively designed and manufactured components fitted on the machinery. The problem they had is they wanted to eliminate the need for expensive inventory costs for spare parts. So that's the approach they've taken. They're now producing machinery with these parts designed for 3D printing, and with the idea that they keep them in a digital inventory. So they're not printing the spares at the moment. So they don't have potentially 5 or 10 years of storage for these spare parts. When they need them in 5 or 10 years, that's when they can print them from their digital inventory. The benefit of some of this technology is that at the point in which they need them in 5 years, they haven't got to worry about the downtime. They can print the parts within minutes. So I wanted to dive into some really impressive statistics. So starting with the nasal swabs. So we were able to print 800 of those on a build plate. That's around 3.5 hours per build, which equates to 16 seconds per swab. And that's in the XMed 412 biocompatible resin. The example just below that is a really neat one, I think, because it's I think Simon, you've got the part just over there. There's 6 joysticks, each with a slight variation on the design. So I believe it was the grip that was slightly different in each of those 6 designs. All 6 parts with a slight different design were printed in one build, which is around 45 minutes. So that's 7.5 minutes per part. And that's in the GPP grey prototyping resin. The example at the top there, there are 72 valves that were printed in the GPP blue resin. That's a 41-minute build, which is roughly roughly 34 seconds per valve. This is in a slightly different material. This is the XCE, which would probably be around 40 seconds per valve, yes, around that. So it's a little bit longer, but still, it's only 40 seconds per part. The parts just below that are end-use components, so the same material as these here. That's in the XCE. It's a functional material, and they're end-use brackets. I think we can fit about 24 of those on a build plate, and that's a 35-minute build, which is roughly 1 minute, 45 seconds per part. And this last example, 21 midsoles, that's printed in the new XCE white, which is Nexa's fastest functional resin. So that's 21 midsoles, each obviously slightly different and tailored to whoever they're made for. That build there is 48 minutes, so it's 2 minutes, 30 seconds per sole. And just to put some of these stats into perspective, another really good example that comes to mind is an automotive customer that we've been working with for a while, who are currently using our FDM printers for production. We ran a part for them that they print at the moment. It usually takes 2 days on their traditional filament-based printer for a single part. We managed to print fit 4 of those parts on a build plate on the Nexa3D printer. And that build took 2 hours. So that's half an hour per part. So you went from 2 days for one part to half an hour for one part. The best thing about this was that when we worked it out, we managed to find that we could clear a month's worth of their backlog on one printer in a working day on the Nexa3D printer. So just to give it some perspective compared to the other stats. And that's all from me. I'm going to pass back over to Simon to wrap things up.
Cool. Thank you, Sachin. So thank you again for joining us. I hope that's been useful for all of you. Obviously, we're going to have the Q&A now, so feel free to fire your questions in. I think, have we had a couple come in already? Yeah. So yeah, anyone else, put your questions in now. Otherwise, feel free to contact us afterwards if you want more information. And also, we will be following up with each of you individually by email, just in case you wanted any more detail. But whether you're interested in this technology or any of the other 3D printers that we offer, obviously we're keen to speak to you about helping to improve your organisation and realise some of the benefits that additive brings. So thank you. So let's go to the Q&A. Obviously you have myself and Sachin, but I think we've also got my colleague Matthew on the line, just in case anyone asks one of those really in-depth, awkward, really technical questions that Sachin and I may struggle with. So go ahead and let's see if we've got any questions coming in.
Okay, so we've got a question: is what layer heights can it print at?
Cool. So just in case you didn't hear that, that question was what layer heights can it print at? So that is a good question. However, we actually deliberately didn't put this information in. And I know that sounds slightly strange, but so traditionally in our industry, people have always used things like layer heights or resolution as being a gauge as to the quality of what a 3D printer can produce. With the Nexa3D, with this particular technology, the way that it works is it is actually able to produce parts that are visually as good as injection molding. But the reality is it prints at anything from 50 or 100 or 200 microns. So if, for example, we were to talk about a 200 micron print, in the traditional sense of 3D printing, people would be thinking that that's a really fat layer height and it's going to be really obvious that it's been printed. But actually the way that this technology works is you can't really see the layers. So it's difficult for it to, you can't really compare it with other printers on that basis. But the short answer is 100 or 200 microns is typical. Generally print at the big fat layer height because that's the quickest and you still get great prints.
I was just thinking, we recently did a print for that engineering contact. That was at 200 microns and he gave it to his director. Right? Yeah,
so yeah, a customer of ours, as Sachin said, we did a print. The engineer walked past the technical director, showed him the print and told him it had been printed, and the technical director refused to believe it. As far as he was concerned, it was an injection molded part. And after a lot of arguing backwards and forwards, he eventually did accept that, yes, it had been 3D printed. But yeah, that kind of shows you the level of quality that you can generate from this.
A few more questions then. So first one is, how does this process create support structures?
Cool. So just to repeat that, how does the process create support structures?
Yeah, I can pick that up. So essentially, I think Simon might have touched on this earlier, but
in the Nexa3D software.
Yeah, so in the Nexa3D software, you essentially bring your STL file, which is from your native CAD format. You translate it into an STL format, which is native to 3D printing, 3D printers, I should say. The middleman between that middle step is slicing the STL. So you're taking an object that's essentially made up of triangles, breaking that down into a layered format, and the Nexa3D software does that for you. Within that software, and our training will cover things like orientation and stuff, because it can be tricky and different across different printers. But essentially you orient the part in the Nexa3D software, and then the software automatically generates support structures for you. So I mean, yeah, we've got a couple examples here. So I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but you've got support. It's sort of like a tree-like structure, and you can just see it on the camera there. And there's a few examples at the top here as well. And yeah, I hope that answers the questions. Anything else?
Yeah, this is it. I mean, as you say, it's automatic, so
yeah,
it's not something that you need to design in or anything like that. You let the software take the strain.
Yeah, I think the main thing to bear in mind is just understanding orientation and all that sort of stuff, which is part of what I do, what Matthew and our other team, other members of our technical team do in terms of the training, you know, understanding orientation and where you'd want to place a part and where you'd want support and where you wouldn't want support. That's all things that we cover.
How do the mechanical properties of parts produced on Nexa machines compare to an equivalent plastic produced on, say, FDM, SLA, or SLS?
Certainly, the problem with FDM is that, of course, you don't get full isotropic properties. Depending on the SLA that you're using, obviously, is going to depend on what can be generated. But as a general rule of thumb, you are as close to isotropic with this technology as you can get in 3D printing.
What time and labour is involved in setting up the printer prior to building a print and subsequently in shutting down the printer after a build has completed? Absolutely, just repeat.
Cool, so I'll repeat that one.
Yeah.
So what's involved in setting up the printer
and then shutting down?
And shutting down,
After the build's completed.
So the two key things really are the build plate and the resin tank. So in terms of shutting down the printer, you take the build plate out, close the door and turn it off. That's it. And it can sit there overnight, can sit there for days really. In terms of getting it ready and things, the most work that you would be doing would be, for example, if you wanted to change resins. So in that instance, there's a pump system installed in the printer, and in the base of the printer, there's a carboy. So you would pump the resin out into the carboy, take out the resin tank and the membrane, swap to a new membrane, obviously for new resin, swap the carboys to the different resin and pump that resin back in. And then obviously put a new build plate in that's fresh, ready to go. Generally, I'd say that process would take 10 to 15 minutes, something like that.
And we've certainly got quicker at it as well, right? Yeah. At the start, you want to be a bit more careful, but then once you get used to it, it's a quicker process.
Yeah. And again, we work with customers on that. So we help them to establish that workflow, ensure that you are purchasing multiple carboys, you know, that you're purchasing multiple build plates, set up, you know, your system so that you are able to clean parts and clean build plates in bulk, as it were, so that you're really maximizing that throughput, and so that you're doing the labor intensive stuff while the printer is running, and then just swapping over so that you're maximizing the throughput.
Next question is, do you have an example of the time difference between different materials printing the same product? So the joysticks, for example.
Short answer is no, I don't think we do we?
In XE we have, so XE would be about 3.5 minutes.
Cool, so let me actually just repeat that question. So do we have examples of the differences in print time between all the different materials? And so that...
Yes, that's 7.5 minutes in the GPP grey.
Versus 3.5 in the new XE.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay.
That's
so yeah, so in GPP grey, which is a fast prototyping resin, 7.5 minutes per one, 6 on the build. With the newest resin, which is actually a prototyping and functional resin, which is called XE white, that would be 3.5 minutes. I suspect, if I had to guess, that something like the XE black, which is a functional but slightly longer print time, you would be adding a couple of minutes onto that. To give you an idea, the longest build that we have ever done on the printer was a single build, which was almost the entire height and build volume of the machine. That was done in the 3843 ABS resin with the highest possible quality settings. So the extremes of everything, and that was 7.5 hours. So we did actually run that one overnight.
Another question. Apart from leaving it for a cup of tea rather than overnight,
Yeah.
are there any differences in workflow to a normal SLA printer?
Cool. So that was basically, are there any differences in workflow between this and an SLA? And well, no, sure. Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head in terms of talking about having a cup of tea instead of leaving it overnight.
That's what that's exactly it.
Yeah.
Isn't it? You get through so much in a working day, so much more than you do. And we've said for years, the best way to use this kind of machinery is that kind of lights off situation, running it overnight, and really maximizing your overnight time, maximizing your weekends for your big 2-day, 3-day prints. But with this, it's the complete opposite. We're having to change what we're saying, because it's actually your working day. You get so much more out of that than you would do running it overnight and running it over the weekend.
Yeah.
Your throughput is so much higher, even just using it during the working day.
Yeah.
Right.
It is. It's a totally different approach, but of course that's brilliant because you're generating so much more output from it. Yeah. You would almost, I would guess, approach it a little bit more like running an injection molding machine, that you are getting that throughput. Yeah.
How is support removed?
Cool. So that one was, how is support removed?
Yeah. So supports are essentially creating the same material as the model. So they need to be removed usually after wash. We'd say sometimes if it's a bit tacky, then after the curing process, but you usually just use sort of snips, and then that gets off the majority of supports, pliers if it's really stuck in, and then we usually just wet and dry the parts down, give them a light sand to clear any of the imperfections that you might have from support material. The nice thing with the software is essentially when the support meets the model, you've got the touch points where the support contacts the model, and because it's designed in this tree-like structure, it gets thinner and thinner up to the point where it's just touching your model, so it is easier to remove supports. And what we've seen with the past, with other SLA and DLP, other resin-based printers, is that support structures get even easier to remove.
Yeah.
And we've noticed that with over the last few months of using the Nexa3D, that with new software upgrades and releases, the supports have got easier to remove, haven't they?
Those touch points are reduced in size. I think the other thing is that because of the capabilities that this opens up in your business, there is a tendency for people with a lot of 3D printers to design something for CNC, for example, and then just take that same design and print it. And really what we're working with our customers to do is to understand the technology, understand the process, understand its operating, capabilities, and then actually design your part really for the process. So the ideal situation is actually you design the need for support material out of the object. That's the best thing if you can. Now, obviously with prototyping, that's not necessarily the case, but for end-use parts, absolutely. And as Sachin was talking about, if you're creating a component for a product now, you want to be designing it for additive because you want to be making it with additive now, but also you want that ready so that in 10 years when you access your digital warehouse and print something, on demand for a customer, you want it to be additive, ready for additive already.
Absolutely.
Okay, and the final question is, what about the mechanical properties of material? I'm assuming there's a specific application behind that, so it might be something you take offline. But
yeah, so that question was chemical properties. Chemical or mechanical. Yeah.
I mean, we'd have to. I think we might need to pick that one up in terms of specifics on the chemical side. I think.
It varies. Yeah. Obviously, the cyanide ester different to the ABS.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, it would depend. It would depend on depend on particularly what you're looking at.
Yeah, but we've got all
yeah.
of that data.
Yeah, there's data
It's
sheets
just
available.
not all up here. Not quite yet, but yeah, we've got it all available, so we can definitely pick that one
Yeah,
up.
I presume we know who asked that question. Yeah, so we can pick that up with you afterwards. Cool. Is that everything? Excellent.
Great.
Good. As we say, so we'll we'll contact you each individually. So if anything does pop up, then we can answer those questions for you. But thank you all again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Hope it was useful. Have a good afternoon.